Welcome back to another episode of the Frustrated CEO podcast. My name is Patrick Lyons. I'm just one of your co-hosts here with my friends and colleagues. First, Leb Tannenbaum, welcome to you, sir. How are you?
Thank you. I'm doing really well.
Good. Excellent. Glad to have you back. And our probably the smartest one of the group, Patsy Feeman, welcome back to you.
Thanks. I'm really excited for this episode.
Good. I just quick. Can you believe this is episode 52? This show is now older than I am, so that's it's impressive. I don't know how that happened. I blinked. Listener, we are back today with part 2 of our interview, our conversation with Suzanne Hanifin. If you missed part 1, highly recommend that you go back and listen to episode 51, some fantastic nuggets. We talked a little bit about trends. We're going to get into a few more today. But the purpose of today's episode is to talk about, to interview Suzanne through the lens of her thought leadership as CEO of Acumen Executive Search. So listener, how do you win the war on talent? What should you be looking for? How do you hire for fit? Now, what makes Suzanne an expert? Well, Suzanne and the team at Acumen Executive Search have a 92.7% retention rate of the candidates that they've placed after 3 years. So that to me says they're doing something, not just about finding the right people, but finding the right people who fit into the right situations. You do that, a 3-year retention rate is unheard of. So let's back up, do a quick reminder of who Suzanne is. I mentioned Suzanne is the founder and CEO of Acumen Executive Search, which is a boutique search firm with that non-traditional business model we talked about, promoting a family culture in the last episode, and how just a few months ago, Acumen was named by the Portland Business Journal one of 2022's most admired companies in Oregon. Suzanne is active in networking, which she spoke about in the last episode, is important to be able to have that support network. So she leads by example in doing that. And she's a self-proclaimed matchmaker for candidates with great companies, someone who thrives on connection. Suzanne Hanifin, welcome back for part 2.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good to have you back. Okay, so we mentioned, we started to talk a little bit in the last episode about trends that you're seeing in the recruiting space. What else? Because that can't be the only one. What else are you seeing?
Yeah, a lot has changed since COVID. And I think most CEOs recognize that and they see it. And I think as a recruiter, there's a couple of trends that need to be talked about. We talked in session 1 about this pre-onboarding timeframe and being able to utilize that time. And that's really from when the candidate signs the offer to their start date. But the other trends are on the interviewing process. So as you know, hence today, we are on Zoom. We are doing things electronically. And so with the interviews going into this model, that obviously has changed. We've grown from that and have learned, whether it's more than one person, you always have a moderator. You always have only one person asking the questions. And the time frame has really shortened to where you would spend weeks in between an interview 1 to interview 2. Now it's days. And it's not only because, this important need, I've got this need, I have to fill it. It's when you look at the unemployment rate, and it's so funny. We notice that if people are in their job and they're doing fine, they're not aware of what's going on. The second a recruiter taps them on the shoulders and they look up and they start looking around going, oh, what else is out there? Then if you're not moving that process in an incredibly fast and efficient way, and candidates are judging on these interviews over Zoom and Teams or what have you, and being very, very prepared ahead of time. they're leaving and walking away.
Mm.
And so I think it's those trends that people need to be aware of. And again, it's being very prepared up front is the secret. Having a moderator if there's more than 2 people on the interview, and being able to put aside on your calendar, I'm going to interview 4 candidates. Let's block out the time now, because it's got to happen in a fairly short, succinct time frame.
That's great. So I'm with a company right now that has done some hiring, and you're working with director and above positions, right? So I'm finding that because I've worked closely with this company for a while, I might not get called into the interview until it's maybe the 3rd round. Can you just talk about rounds and who shows up to the interview? Because it could be, what I've seen is it could be the person who will actually wind up managing that person or leading that person. But I've also seen HR kind of take the first cut at it, and they have maybe don't have the understanding of what's happening in that department or what's. So I think this, the CEOs that are listening, people that are listening, would want to know a little bit more about the interview structure and who shows up to the interview. And
Yeah, let's break it into 2 different parts. So let's use as for us, again, like you said, we recruit directors and above. So really, we do a 3 interview part. So by the time the candidate goes to our clients, they know the good, the bad, the ugly. They understand that culture. We've done deep dives communicating and articulating that. So that's a different type of interview. And that interview really needs to be with the stakeholders, whether it's the direct manager. That should be a one-on-one, period. And then number 2, if they pass that and the person says, yeah, I can work with this person, and the candidate says the same thing, then it goes to stakeholders, which should be the executive or director team peers. HR should be there to support on that behavioral piece of it. And same thing with you, Leb. You need to be there to support that cultural fit, right, and make sure that there is that alignment. And whether you do that interview 2 or the final, it all depends, or if you're working with an external recruiter, or if you posted and prayed somebody would come in. And so I'm not sure if I'm answering that question directly enough.
I think that's really helpful. And something else comes to mind. You mentioned the story in the previous episode of someone going all the way across the country and being told to come back again next week. I'm also finding, because of Zoom and the pace with which things happen, I've seen interviews where someone who was supposed to be there isn't there. And I've also seen interviews where the interviewer has been so busy with tactical work that they haven't put together a good list of questions, or, and so they get what they get. So again, maybe there's something about, if I'm the direct manager, but it's going to go higher, what kind of questions do I ask? Do you huddle the whole team together and say, here's what we want for this position?
Yeah, absolutely. So at Acumen, we follow a very strict 9-step methodology process.
Okay.
With all of our intakes, and we will interview the entire stakeholders as part of our intake. And the number 1 is the most important, and that is really understanding what are the needs, what has worked, what has not worked. Understanding all those nuances. And as a hiring manager, or as an outsider asking a hiring manager, it's questions like, how do you measure success in this position? If you can describe your department culture in 5 words or less, what would you say? You'd be shocked on how many CEOs cannot answer that question about their organization. You know, or who was your best hire and why? What was successful? We ask those type of questions because sometimes it is really hard to understand that culture. And so when you look at it at a 360 degree, what is culture? How do you get in there and understand it? It's knowing, yes, your vision, mission is super important, but do you live and breathe your mission and vision? How do the other employees see that? Do they believe in it? And do they act on it on a day-to-day basis? So again, without those really hard intake questions, I don't think you could ask the right questions without knowing that. And I think this is where you three who really focus on culture and fit should be involved in those conversations. And same thing with human resources. They need to either be the ones asking the stakeholders these hard questions and then being able to take all this information and quantifying it and saying, this is kind of what has worked in this organization and what has not. And I know go ahead.
So what you're talking about there is the pre-candidate interview work as critically foundational.
Absolutely. And without that, like you said, Leb, people are so busy right now, you know, and then they show up to these interviews and they don't have questions. They don't know how to measure, you know, oh, somebody's, you know, oh, you're doing this. This is exactly what I need. Let's hire them. Without really pausing and thinking, you know, is there alignment again with these goals and values that they're going to stay for a long time? So I think doing this pre-work is so critical, and we could not do our job or have this retention rate without doing it. Right. And getting the stakeholders bought into where they will all talk to you too. And, you know, I kind of want to mention this right here because I think this is an important thing for all CEOs. There's really only 3 reasons why somebody will leave an organization. And money, again, we only recruit director levels and above. Money has never been the issue. They leave their jobs because they don't feel valued, that their voices are not heard and they cannot affect change. They leave a job when there's some leadership or management change, whether a company was bought, sold, new boss, what have you. And the last one is again, well, I kind of put 1 and 2 together, which is don't feel valued and can't affect change. If people feel like they're just in this, oh, I don't know, gerbil cage of running in circles, they're not happy and they will leave. And so as recruiters, when we talk to people who, you know, are not looking for a job and we're finding them through our networks, the ones that kind of go, I wonder what's out there. When you dig in, it's usually due to one of these 3 reasons.
And you know what's interesting? First, I agree with you, especially when you're talking about high performers. Mm-hmm. High performers will not stick around when they feel like they can't impact when they're you said the words you use, they can't affect change. And it's not about the money. And yet so often when the person resigns and the organization then finds out what the new salary is the person's making, they'll sweep that exit under the rug of, well, we can't, they got offered more money and that's why they're leaving. And they miss the opportunity to ask which of these 3 reasons really contributed to this person leaving. Like what made them look in the first place? Sure, they got more money when they left, but they didn't leave for more money. They left because they didn't feel valued. Their voice wasn't heard. There was a leadership change, which do I want to work for this new, the landscape has changed. Do I want to work here? Or they don't feel like they can affect change.
Right.
And, yeah.
And I think this is also really important to state, again, years of doing this. counter offers don't work.
Mm.
Because again, they're not leaving for money. And sometimes they'll stay for that extra money. But I read a study, and I want to say it was from either the New York Times or Harvard, and I'll find it for you, Patrick, and send it to you, that within the first 12 months of a counteroffer, something like 90% of people have left. And I think CEOs get to this point of, oh my gosh, Leb can't leave. We're working on this proposal. Let's just pay him this money. He'll stay and he'll forget about this other opportunity. And that it doesn't work. If you need Leb's time, pay him for consulting and help, to bridge it, or ask him for a 5-week notice or a 6-week notice. There's ways to work around it without a counteroffer, because they just don't work.
Wow, that's great to know. So here's another thing I think our listeners would be interested in. I remember working in New York City in a really large public organization. And so this is kind of gets into age and culture fit, right? And so a younger person gets hired, and they meet the requirements of fitting the culture. And there was kind of a repurposed vision and some things like that. And then we're working with the more senior people who ultimately, they're under. And the senior, here would be an example. The senior person says, "What's with these young people? They don't ask for an appointment. They just walk into my office and expect me to drop what I'm doing and talk to them or answer their question." And there was this culture. It came to the point where we actually had mentoring gatherings, trying to build community amongst different age groups. Anything you're seeing that our listeners would want to know, or ways to recognize, these people do want to raise their voice, and they might walk into your office when you don't expect it, and maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think it goes back to that, really understanding your company and hiring for your company. Okay. There's always going to be differences on different generational differences. I mean, good golly, I mentioned, just chit-chatting. I have a 26-year-old, and then I have a 13-year-old, and one in between. That's a whole generation different. And their approach to things are so different. And so I think it's just really understanding those differences and honoring those, because there's benefits from both sides of it. And so do you have an open enough culture that you can talk about it? I think, when you look at age and in the different generations, I think in employment right now, we are working with 4 generations. And, that's unbelievable. And I'm seeing, in this director level and above, people are wanting to hire more Gen X's, which I'm a Gen Xer. And when you look at the population, you've got the boomers here, the Gen Xers here, and the millennials here. And so how do you position that as well? Because a lot of our companies are saying we have a lot of people here and a lot of people here, and not a lot, again, in that range of generations. And so it's also has to be part of that strategy of either we're going to mentor the millennials up, to bridge that gap. And that's what we're seeing primarily from our clients.
Suzanne, I remember reading this a long time ago, and it stuck with me. There was a statistic on hiring that said the more the hiring manager talks, the better they think the interview has gone. I see for the listener, you can't see, but Suzanne smiled and laughed and nodded. And I find a lot of times that comes from, sometimes that it may come from, as Leb already alluded to, that managers not prepared. And so they're just kind of talking in circles, maybe even coming from another meeting. They're not even in the right mindset. They're just talking. It's just blah. Sometimes it comes from the desperation of having these positions open, and I'm now in full-on salesperson mode. I'm trying to sell you on why you want to work here, instead of flipping the script and having the candidate, I think, sell you on why they're a good fit. But I could be wrong too. This is your area of expertise. How do you advise a leader to structure that conversation? Less talking, more talking. Who's selling whom in that meeting?
Well, it's funny, Patrick, because we do prep our candidates and we make them have a list of questions, because we know the more you get them to talk, then they feel that it's worked out great and let's hire this person.
Yep.
But especially since COVID and these interviews with Zoom and electronically, we're also really helping our clients build out those questions and to come in prepared. I think that is going away because interviews are getting shorter. People don't like to be online for hours at a time, where, somebody could come in, you do the coffee and you have this small talk, and then you jump into the interviews, and then there's, let me show you on a tour, and again, it's more small talk. They're getting very shortened, 40, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour. When in the past, pre-COVID, our interviews, again, I think on average was an hour and 15 minutes, and that does not include the tour, to now 50 minutes. So you've lost 25 minutes of just kind of that comfort zone. So knowing that, you have to come in prepared. So now we really do work with our clients on interview questions, and it goes back to that intake. What are your priorities? And then allowing at least 10 to 15 minutes for the candidate to ask you questions. And that's where you can sell it. But it's done to where your time is worth it, because this person's worth your time.
Right.
Yeah.
I think that's the key, is if I'm selling the whole time, I might be selling to the wrong person.
Mm-hmm. Oh, absolutely. You're selling to the wrong person, because you're not finding out what motivates them. How do they measure success? How are they going to decide on coming here? And why are they leaving their current position? If people are not asking those basic questions in an interview, you're missing a lot.
Of course, the flip side of that could be true. You're selling to the right person, but you talk them out of being the right person because all you've done is talk to them and haven't listened to them. So
yes, absolutely.
That's a great point. Suzanne, on the Acumen website, you have a lot of space dedicated to diversity, equity, and inclusion. We know that clearly keeps CEOs awake at night. Those are the things we want to address on this show. How do you guide, coach, recommend an organization approach that topic when they have openings? How do you make sure that they are being inclusive, that they're casting a wide net? What guidance do you have for the listener?
Yeah, thank you. That is such a great question, Patrick, and it's evolving every day. And I want to say that because, when we look at equity, we're not talking about equal. We're looking at equity in a whole different way. And I think people don't necessarily understand it. So I'm going to back up and really talk about how everybody has their own perspective on DI, period, and why they are wanting more diversity in their organization. And we ask our clients that. And a lot can really explain why. It's not just because I need a number. It's because we need these diverse thoughts, and we need this change of the way we're doing and thinking. And we do need to be more inclusive to our audience, or, our customers, or what have you. And once you understand that, then you can really work on their priorities on this position. And I mentioned in the first interview section that it may be you have your list of 10 priorities. These are the I really wish this candidate had these 10 things. Well, it's up to us as a recruiter to also push our clients to say, okay, this person of color or this woman or, on the equity or on the diversity, spectrum, they have 7 out of 10. But here's what they have. They can be coached. Here's, resources to give them whatever. And that's truly equity. It's not, are we comparing people apples to apples, but are we able to raise somebody up to become equal candidates, qualified to the other people?
Mm.
And so we work really hard, and we are so proud of our record for the last 3 years. I think it's 68% of our placements have been women or people of color.
Mm.
And again, it's really being very clear and understanding, why do you want, the diversity? Do you understand it? And then once they come here to Portland or to anywhere, what's their community and how is that onboarding? We keep going back to the importance of onboarding. It is so important because, again, if there's no community, they will leave.
Mm.
Well, and you'd said in the in episode 1 about taking the long view, and hearing you discuss right now, to me, that's the long view. It's finding the right candidate, making sure they're successful by integrating them into a community, making sure the culture is a fit. So it is that first 3 years of an employee's life in this company, not just filling seats. And that's what I see. You're differentiating.
Yeah, absolutely. And it goes back when you said, Patrick, we're very involved in different groups and different communities. And I think that, again, helps us not only attract candidates because they see that we're actively doing things and making a difference, but it also allows us to make introductions to where it's an easier, if I want to use this word, easier assimilation into the Pacific Northwest or what have you, because we are products of this past. And let's talk about it. Let's talk about, when the riots were going on in downtown. Let's talk about all of this stuff so people do understand with their eyes wide open, coming and making those decisions.
If my company is behind in diversity and equity and inclusion, how do I make my company? Do you have suggestions? How do I make my company more attractive to a more diverse population? It's because it's like a chicken or an egg thing. I may not have the community to welcome and integrate someone who doesn't look like everybody else here. It's not just looks, but someone who is diverse, because diversity is more than just ethnicity and skin and gender. But if I don't have that, how do I get there?
Yeah, and I'm not sure if I'm the right expert on it, but that we at Acumen, we actually use a DI consultant, and her whole business is helping frame and help organizations through these conversations. And so she's worked with us. We've done a lot in our process and our communication, and it's a true partnership. We will refer many different organizations to our clients when we feel this is beyond us, and I think when it comes to that DEI conversation, it's really, whether it's you three that focus in on culture and fit, to have those hard conversations. And people may say, oh, it'd be great, but kind of put a little skin in the game too goes a long way in change.
I have a question that's based on not a lot of data, but it seems to be a conversation, which is that candidates are looking at companies, not just around culture, but purpose, and maybe also a lens of sustainability or impact environmentally. Are you seeing that?
Not so much. I've read the same studies, and I think it does a disservice to some manufacturers that maybe make screws. That there's not a big purpose in it besides you're helping build something. But no, I think we're seeing a lot has to do with that culture, that leadership team. People make decisions not just on the CEO, but how dynamic is the team? How well do they work together? Do they communicate? Are they backstabbing each other? Are they throwing each other under the bus? We see more, again, director level and above, making those decisions on going with an organization based on that. Not necessarily if they're a service provider, widget maker, have a bigger purpose in life.
Yeah. Okay. That's great. And what happens in this world that you operate so wonderfully and effectively in when there's 10,000 people laid off at Amazon, and there's 10,000 people laid off at Facebook, and big shifts in people suddenly finding themselves, maybe they were happy there and they're not there anymore.
Yeah, again, that's not necessarily my world too much. If you look at the unemployment, it didn't change. So you can think about that for a minute. 10,000 people laid off within a week, 10,000 people were hired. I think at all of those organizations, when we look at an organization as a pyramid, I'm kind of there you go. And we're dealing with that director level and above. Those people really have not had major shifts. I think our shifts are people are recruited away or they're retiring, or they're grown and now they need a CFO from just a controller. There's something out externally that is happening that brings us in. So again, people are talking about these huge layoffs, but when you look at the unemployment number, it's not changing.
That's good.
What other questions do we have before we round the corner and start heading into our Let's Get Practical?
Well, I have one, and it's now that the market, certainly for the candidates you get placed, has been a probably national search anyway. But I'm curious how you're seeing this virtual world we're in now is affected by by what part of the country you're looking in, or I don't know if that's a clear question, but you'd mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, every one of our searches is a national search. Because again, I think people need to stop thinking I'm recruiting for this and I need 100 resumes. It should be, I'm recruiting for this and I would love to find the one. So it goes back to understanding your company's culture. What's the alignment between values and goals? Understanding those priorities. How open are you to stretch from those priorities? And then being very intentional on your outreach. And it's not, let's just post this out at 100 different sites and let's hope, we get this. It's really about being targeted. And it's, we say this all the time, like, salespeople do, it's not the shotgun approach. It's the real targeted. That means a lot more and you get a lot more done.
Which is actually much harder.
Much harder.
Much harder than taking the shotgun approach, yes.
Exactly.
In our strategy work, we say strategy is the art of exclusion. So, in your work, finding the right director is getting to the one.
Right. And I love that. Say that strategy piece again.
Strategy is the art of exclusion.
Oh, Patsy, I may steal that. That's a
Okay,
great one.
please do. I stole it from Lev, so you can steal it from me. I'll pass it
A bunch of
along.
thieves on this podcast.
That is pretty fantastic.
But that's where that's gut wrenching work.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going for just one, and it's got to be the right one, and I've got to be clear about what the right fit is.
Yeah, and I think, when you go down that pyramid, and again, I'll throw my 26-year-old under the bus. He'll leave somebody for a nickel. It's not. He's like, oh, this looks cool over here. I'm going to go look over there. That's a different hiring, and that is really maybe that we're okay. I need a body. I need somebody to do this. But as you go up that pyramid, that's where the alignment becomes so much more important, and retention. And we talked about recruiting, but the other side of that coin is that retention. And if you do not have alignment on both, you have poor retention. Do you know how much harder it is for recruiting? And then vice versa. If you have poor recruiting, you don't get the retention. So I do think it's the same conversation. It's just two different ways of looking at it.
And the positions you're talking about are, I always say no one works in a vacuum. So even somebody on the front lines of an organization, when they're struggling, there are people who are impacted by that, right? And that's why you got to manage performance. That's why we have to set people up. We've got to develop them and help them become successful, so that not just for themselves, but for the people around them. But the positions you're talking about, when you get that hire wrong, when you hire the wrong person in one of those senior level positions, they struggle, but entire organizations struggle. And not just their own, but any other organization that has to interact with that organization. It really is, it becomes exponentially more impactful the higher up in that pyramid that you go. It's exponentially more important to get those hires right. And it is about hiring for fit, hiring for culture.
Oh, absolutely. And you asked earlier kind of to define culture. And I'm going to just say it's tone at the top. Culture is what is acceptable and what's not acceptable in an organization. And that starts at the top. And it doesn't matter if it's a Fortune 100 company to a company with 3 people. And I think people need to be really, again, intentional on their hiring. We've said this now probably 3 times. What are your priorities? What are you willing to stretch? But most importantly, is there alignment between goals and values?
Well said. Leb, any other questions? Or Patsy, any questions before we?
I'm good.
No, I think this is great.
Beautiful. Okay. Suzanne, you've been through this once, so you know the drill. This is the part where we like to give practical application to our listeners who have stuck with us to the end of another episode on things that they can do tomorrow to begin getting better at, in this particular case, at hiring for fit, hiring for culture, attracting and retaining top talent. So what suggestions, what advice would you have for that CEO listener?
Be prepared. Don't, it's no longer shooting from the hip. When you walk into an interview, be prepared, have your questions prepared ahead of time, and don't waste people's times.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
What else? Any other? I don't want to cut you off.
No, I'll listen to everybody else.
That's good. Patsy, Leb went first last time. You go this time.
Okay, well, I was going to say the compliment to what Suzanne just said is know your organization. And that's part of being prepared, but I think it needs to be restated. So be aware that the interviewing process is getting shorter, 50 minutes now. And that's part of being prepared. So being prepared, you got to be crisp. And let's see. What else would I add? There are 3 reasons people typically leave from this this director and above, is they don't feel valued. There's been a leadership change, or they don't see where they can make a contribution. That is affect change.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll leave a few for you and Patrick and Leb.
Leb, you want to go?
Okay. Well, I would say allow for and embrace generational differences.
Yep.
I think the one thing that we haven't talked about since the beginning of the first episode with you, Suzanne, is it's okay to have fun. You're doing some things and to continue with team development and have fun, and the cooking breakfasts, and so I think I don't know exactly how that fits into the virtual world, but people are figuring out how to have add some fun into their culture, I think for our listeners, especially for the leaders in organizations, that there is truth in defining and knowing intentionally what is acceptable at the top and what isn't, and what are we about, and who it's not the shotgun approach anymore. I think that would be the next thing I'd say. Targeted, intentional, every hire, because every person there matters.
Good stuff.
And I would add, even more so in this hybrid world, every person matters.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
Beautiful. My turn. All right. I will add, I love this. It's short and to the point. Counter offers don't work. They don't work. They might stay for a bit for the extra dollars, but they will eventually leave in relatively short order. On the DEI discussion, do the work to understand why you want more diversity, equity, and inclusion in your organization, and then let that be your guide to the steps that you take to accomplish those goals. Have a long-term view on onboarding and integrating new folks. But it's not just, the first, you talked about, it's a multi-year process to make sure that people are integrated, that they find their community, that they feel supported, that you're checking in regularly. I have no doubt, Suzanne, that's what leads to a 92.7% retention rate of those placements 3 years after their start date. And then we talked a little bit about CEO. This is the last one I'll do. You talked about the CEO setting the tone, and Suzanne, you also said candidates are making decisions not just on the CEO, but on the broader culture of the team. That, is it a supportive team? Is it do they have my back? CEOs, get that right. If you want to improve your retention and your even attracting and retaining good talent, get that right. Patsy, Lebs, or Suzanne, what else? Anything that we missed that you would advise a CEO to think about and do?
I can think of one thing, and I'll put it this way. Culture is a living organism. Just because it was good a year ago doesn't mean it's going to stay. It's not going to stay. You're going to hire different people. You're going to hire new people. If your team functioned well in one situation, it doesn't mean they're going to function so well in another situation. So you have to keep after it and recognize it's not a point in time that stays forever. It requires constant attention, just like a parent is with their child.
Truth. Any others? We're good?
We're good.
All right. Suzanne, thank you so much for, again, joining us. I know these are sweet spots for you, but I also know it requires energy and time. So thank you for joining us for a second episode to talk about, in this case, hiring for fit. So good to have you.
Well, thank you. It was fun. Thank you.
Good. Now, just in case someone is only listening to this episode and didn't hear the first one, if they are interested in potentially hiring you or Acumen and the team to help them fill some of these positions, or they just have some additional questions that we didn't answer today, how might they get in touch with you?
Yeah, definitely through our website. It's acumenesearch.com, and all the contact information is there.
And I'll say this, listener, we talked about DEI. Check out that tab on the Acumen website. There are specific resources there to help you dealing with things like bias. So these are great tools. And if you are interested in downloading this episode's Let's Get Practical, you can find it on our website at thefrustratedceo.com. We encourage you to connect with Patsy and Leb and myself on LinkedIn, and heck, why not with Suzanne? I'm sure you post interesting content for them as well. So connect with all of us on LinkedIn. That's where you'll find us. If you're interested in being a guest on a future episode, reach out, let us know. We're always looking for great CEOs and thought leaders to help us address the issues keeping CEOs awake at night. Leb and Patsy, thank you so much. I just enjoy this with you both.
A pleasure.
Thank you.
Yeah, great to have you. Listener, thanks for sticking with us to the end of this episode, and we will see you again next time on the Frustrated CEO Podcast.